Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard-to-explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
Hey, everybody. I am on with my friend and Rabbi Arthur Gross-Schaefer here in Santa Barbara. Carrie had an accident and tore her knee up. She's in physical therapy. So keep her in your heart and in your thoughts because she deserves better. And I can't really do this very well without her, but we're going to proceed. Arthur is also a professor at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Gosh, so many things are flooding through my head. I mean, I have some memories, and I don't know if, Arthur, do you follow the sports at your school at all?
At Loyola, not really. How are we doing?
Well, no, what I was thinking of is Hank Gathers played basketball there years ago, decades ago now. But we saw the recording of him falling on the court and dying of undiagnosed heart condition. He was an exceptional player. And so when I think of Loyola Marymount, I think of that. And probably the trigger is a week ago, my nephew, my 6'10" nephew, who is a basketball player at Morgan State University, was diagnosed with the same condition. And it's the same condition that LeBron James's son, passed out from.
Yeah.
And so we have mixed feelings because we're really glad it was discovered in my nephew, Christian. So anyway, that's a whole long thing just to say that when I think Loyola Marymount right now, my nephew is on my mind.
So
anyway.
So very quickly, by the way, I'm now officially retired from Loyola Marymount after 43 years this week.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What are they going to do without you?
They'll do just fine. But Hank Gathers and that whole episode, I was actually a minor part of in that. I started to do some research and we found out that perhaps the coach knew that he was not going to take his medications for that game because the medications made him a little bit slower. Now, he may have made that decision himself. I didn't follow it that closely beyond that.
Yeah.
Because I did have some of his friends in my classes, and they were very upset. And the reason he may have done that is that that a lot of the scouts from pro teams were coming, and he wanted to be really sharp for them. But the bigger problem was they had the what's it called? The defibrillators.
Yeah.
But it was nationally televised, and they didn't want to use them on the court.
Oh my goodness!
Outside to use them, and then it was too late. And you may remember Bo Kimball, who was both.
Yeah.
And Hank was left-handed, and Bo Kimball started to do all the free throws left-handed, and Loyola played better than we ever had. But the sadness of what could have been had they acted appropriately was very present. So it brings back to me about the abuse of sports.
Yes.
And how sometimes very, very quickly, when I was at USC, I was in charge of a dorm. And there's one of the freshman linebackers I would play with and play chess with. I was always afraid to win. He was much bigger than me. But during a game, a part of a nail, someone's fingernail came off into his eye.
Came off what?
Came off and went into his eye.
What?
So he goes over to the coach And he says, there's a nail in my eye. And the coach says, yeah, I see that. He goes, maybe I should be pulled out. He goes, no problem. They'll pull you out and I'll take away your scholarship. So he forced him to continue to play. But the worst part for me, that was terrible. But the worst part is I took some guys in the dorms because the football players are like, gods at USC.
Yeah.
So I took them to visit him and with some dorm guys and said, who else has visited you? Have the coaches come? No. Have any of the other players come? No. It was the first time I really started to realize how college athletes are often treated like pieces of meat and it's a sadness, which is very deep. So bringing the Pan Gather brings up that sadness. But the joy right now is to be with you.
Well, thank you. It's my joy too. We have quite a bit of history, and you can share what's on your heart. But I just want to tell everybody, because I have referenced this situation before about you on the show, and one of my experiences with you was when I was being challenged. I remember the year that it happened, because 2015 is when the Supreme Court opened the door for marriage equality. And I was outed as a supporter, in a denomination that does not approve of, same-sex unions. And I had already notified my bishop. I probably still have the text in one of my old phones or something, but I had, years before that, I had messaged him, and we were talking by text, and I just told him how I was honoring and advocating for LGBTQ plus folks. And he replied, David, may God bless both of us as we seek God's will and best for humanity. And that kind of ended the conversation at that point. But then someone else reported me, a colleague. And well, before they reported me, he said, I will report you unless you recant.
No.
Can you believe that? We're not in the 16th century. But, I just basically, I ignored that anyway. Then I end up getting a phone call from the bishop's office. And he's a friend. He did not want any drama. And he said as much. He just said, David, I'm just an old man trying to finish out his career without too much trouble. I ended up having to go in and meet with him for 2.5 hours. And then a couple of weeks after that again. And we talked, and it never turned into, what our values were or what, the Bible says or anything like that. It was more a matter of him as an elected official defending the Constitution, of the organization. So I ended up being shunned. But before I was shunned, the Elders Council, he assigned the Elders Council to meet with me, which were, I think, 5 men. And you knew that I was going to have that meeting. And you and I were exchanging emails. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning in my office. And you said, 5 against 1, that's not fair. Even though I didn't hear it as 5 against 1. I didn't feel they were against me. I have a lot of compassion for people who, well, that's a whole other story. Anyway, you said that's not fair. Pick me up in the morning. So, we had about a 45-minute drive. When I remember when you got in the car, you were dressed to the nines. And I said, Arthur, I've never seen you dressed like this. And he said, I want them to take me seriously. And so, we get there and everybody was warm. It was a very, as I'm sure you recall, it was a very warm environment, and nobody was, being hostile towards me or anything. In fact, the oldest person there asked me, please don't leave us. Right. But it wasn't a matter of me leaving. It was a matter of me getting pushed out.
Right.
So,
Right.
anyway, do you have any thoughts? That's just one story, one of my rabbi stories. But what are your thoughts about all of that, and any other thoughts?
Well, on that particular issue, for me, first of all, when I decided to become a rabbi, there were different seminaries I could attend. And I'm a little bit more traditional than the more liberal one called the Reform Movement. And the more traditional one's called the Conservative Movement. And so I applied both to HUC, more liberal, and the more conservative one. Some a little more traditional. And I got accepted to both. But the Reform one had long before allowed women to be ordained as rabbis. The conservative one did not. And I would not go to one that would not ordain women as well. So I went to the Reform. So that was on the women's issue. And that was a big one for a long time. The Reform movement did it. Orthodox said, no way. Conservative, there was a major fight politically eventually, but it took them a while. In the area of gay and lesbian, I remember my first year of rabbinic school was in Jerusalem. And one of my colleagues, first year student, comes to me and he says, can I talk to you privately as a lawyer? And I said, okay, I'll charge you. I jokingly said that. Anyways, and told me he was gay. And he asked me, do I have to have integrity? Do I have to tell him I'm gay? And I said to him, the game is already rigged. If you tell them you are gay, you will not be ordained.
Wow.
They are telling you very clearly this. My suggestion is that you do not tell them that you are gay. Once you're ordained, they can't stop you. And then you come out and you help change the system from outside. I remember that conversation very, very vividly. And that's what he did. And then later on, I was a camp rabbi at a conservative camp called Camp Ramah, Ojai. And a lot of the rabbinic students there, and that, by the way, the Reform movement eventually opened it to gay and lesbian, but there were some of our professors who would not sign our graduation form because of that. Conservative movement was still in the midst, and I had several of the rabbinic students who were there as camp counselors come to me and ask me the same question, and I gave them the same answer. It's already been rigged, and we want it to change. I want you not to lie, but not to make any statements. I want you to be ordained and then change the system. And that's what they did as well. And so it was still an issue that is very troublesome to me. We've not had the major problems because it's really only the Orthodox that take all of the Bible in a literal fashion. They weren't always this way. The Orthodox were willing to change things based on current needs. Came the Reformation, and they became much more traditional. The Reform movement was always willing to say current needs are critical, and we need to hear it and then understand what God wants us to do in this reality. And they also believe, as I do, that the Bible was not, in a sense, written by God and then given. It was actually written by people trying to understand what God expects of them, but also their cultural biases at that time came into play. It's like, if I was back in that time, would I have thought, well, wait, this is clear? But that it changes over time. Therefore, women was not a major issue. Gays and lesbians took a while because some of our professors, especially in the East Coast, were much more traditional. Had to go around them. So that's why, for me, it's never been a major issue at all, except to support that we move in that direction. And it took several rabbis who were ordained and did not come out as gay and lesbian until they were ordained. And they really were wonderful rabbis, wonderful human beings. And then people were much more open to that. But I do remember one more quick story. When I became the rabbi up here in Santa Barbara, and I'd been here for a short time, my high holiday sermon, one of them was to welcome everyone into our community. That includes people who weren't Jewish, who were married to people who were Jewish, and make it much better, including the gay and lesbian community. And the people who were complaining were young couples who were putting their kids in our preschool. And they said, now you're going to bring in gay and lesbian teachers? I said, no, I'm not going to bring them in. They're already here. But the group that was very supportive were primarily grandparents, the older members, because they all had, by and large, a child here or there.
Yes.
I didn't expect that to get their support that much. It's a hard issue, but not for me.
Wow. Hey, Arthur, do you remember the first time we had breakfast?
Right. No.
You don't remember?
What would I do wrong?
Everything. No, we ate at Joe's Cafe on State Street.
No. Okay.
And we were just, I guess, I don't know if feeling each other out is the thing, because I don't think there was a need for that so much. But you found out that my that at the heart of my doctoral studies was, just understanding the relationship between peoples and faith systems in late antiquity, basically in the West, in the Roman Empire. And you asked, some of the authors I had read, and so we went over that. But I remember saying that I was convinced after my my learning, my research, that Christianity, particularly Western Christianity, is inherently anti-Judaic. And I don't know that people have conversations with pastors who say things like that very often. I don't know, maybe that happens a lot and I'm just not aware of it. But I was kind of feeling like maybe it opened a door for us to continue to grow together, just an awareness. And I feel that more than ever that the system was built on the backs of Jews and I guess heterodox Christians, because pretty much everybody was religious, even if they were pagan in those times. I guess that's maybe not the best term to use because it means something completely different now, pagan. So you don't remember that conversation, do you?
I don't, but I do remember that. Okay, David, can I control this discussion for a few minutes?
Go for it.
Because I was thinking of this time with you this morning as I was on my retirement cruise on the Danube.
Ah.
Joyful, good food, everything great. But it wasn't totally great for me because every time I went to a city, Munich, I couldn't help but remember 1972, the massacre where 11 Israeli Olympic athletes were killed and one, I think, German police officer and the terrorists who had taken them captive. And people may remember that. And that the person in charge of the Olympics said, "Oh, we got to keep going with the Olympics. We can't stop for this," even though they were being held hostage. And then I go to Nuremberg. And in Nuremberg, that's where Hitler had the huge gatherings. And not only did he have those huge gatherings, but they often used, I think, actual copies of Martin Luther's book, open to where the Jews were seen as being very corrupt, evil, and we have to separate
I
them.
think the title of that was Against the Jews.
Yes, it was. I think it was the lies. Something about lies,
Okay.
the word lies. I think so. And and then we go to another town, and I'm having a Jewish tour of that town, not expecting anything major. And then the person says, "Do you want to see what's on the church outside part of the building?" I go, "Do I really want to see this? Why? I'm not interested that much." He goes, "Oh, you'll be interested." And it shows a pig with people with cone hats, which meant they're Jews, sucking from the pig to show how evil they were. Still up. There's a little monument, a little thing about, this is
Yeah.
anti-Semitism, but it's still up, still teaching those those things. We then go to other cities. Almost every city, I'm feeling this history, and I'm feeling that within the current issue that we can debate or not or whatever about Gaza and the October 7th treatment of the viciousness, the atrocities that took place, and right now, and all the women who were either heard other of their friends screaming because they're being raped, but not just raped, but other things were being jammed up their vagina, that their breasts were being cut off. I mean, all these terrible things. And most of the groups that are for women's rights have said it didn't happen, don't want to be involved. And so for me, I think I understand a little bit better why Israelis, but also why Jews are feeling so depressed. It's not just that what happened was part of the ongoing issues of Israel and Palestine. And I'm both pro-Israel, but also pro-Palestine, and have worked trying to create, understand the dual narratives and trying to create some type of way to work together. That's been part of my journey for many, many years. But that the Jewish community, I think, and a lot of us, and I felt it, we can't help but remember the Middle Ages. Jews were expelled from Jerusalem, brought back in, expelled. People were burned at the stakes. I mean, all this stuff from both the Catholic, Protestant, and Islamic traditions. The tradition is that Muhammad watched 600 Jews be beheaded. I mean, all of this stuff. And so for many of us, it's not just what happened on that particular day, or that's just one more battle between Palestinians and Israelis. It's this whole history that we're holding
But
right now. And my question,
let me ask, do you think, and of course, this doesn't have to, be consistent across the board, but
yeah,
among Jews, do you think the dominant feeling is more sadness or fear?
I think it's both. I think it's both. The fact, like here, do I know Jews who are afraid to wear yarmulke outside? Yes. Do I know what happened at UCSB? That's our college that both you and I are living close to.
Yeah,
And
that's my
how,
alma mater. Yeah.
and how when a group took over the multicultural center said no Zionists here. I'm a Zionist. I believe in the need and the desire for a people to return to their homeland. We have the Bible. We have all sorts of history of the Jewish kings and so forth. It's been part of our land for a long time, but it has to be shared now in a very careful way because while they may not be true with the length for the Palestinian community, it is true that they see that as their land, and I respect that. So, how do you work together, and how do you make basically the concept that what I want for my neighbor, I want for myself? How do I create that type of relationship? And a lot of that's been broken because a lot of the information that we think was given to Hamas to target where they went. And now the research is to target families. They knew how many kids, how many parents, and they targeted families and what they were doing. And that information had to come from people that they had brought into their homes from Gaza. Several of them were driving people from Gaza to hospitals and so forth, and they became targeted. So it's such a feeling of being betrayed and no one's there. And that's the women's groups that should be saying, "Wow, they were targeting women, and look what they did." They're not doing that, and
Do
so
you
there's
do you
anger.
think
Yeah,
you mentioned both Israel and Palestine?
yeah.
Do you think the holistic solutions for the world, including Israel or Israeli people or Palestinian people, do you think that we can find holistic solutions within the nation state system that has emerged over the past few centuries?
Well, first of all, I really know your bias, so that's a setup question. Thank you, David, for setting me
And
up.
I asked it because I know your bias.
Um, I don't, I don't know how else to govern. It's for instance, when you look at the international court and what they're doing, and I have some major problems with that. You can say, "Oh, a country has done X, Y, and Z. We can do certain things." But with a terrorist group, I mean, how do you do anything to make that group stop and so forth? And that there, I don't see how I mean, there's been different theories. One's a federation structure, but that requires a lot of trust. I think that trust, at least for most Israelis and many Jews, has been broken. David, the question for me is actually there are different concepts, perhaps a federation, maybe even a one state. I don't see that there because the trust has been so broken. And there's a fear, a deep fear, because so many people have said um, that what they did on October 7th, that they will keep doing that. And and also for those of us, and I'm one of them, in 2005, who advocated for Israel to leave Gaza, who not only advocated but also gave money to help at least one business expand and prepare itself to leave, but to give that business over to the Palestinians was, I think it was for flowers that were being sent to Europe. Really good business, and all this stuff. And once Israel did pull out, they had to actually physically carry people out from Gaza to say this is now Palestinian property. Create. And I think within 1 or 2 days, or within a short period of time, Hamas took out Fatah, throwing people off the roof and killing and so forth. And then they went over to that place that we had helped with many others, a lot of American philanthropists, to create this major business and that they could now take over and dismantle everything because they didn't want to take anything. So the lack of trust is huge, and all the ceasefires that have happened have all been broken by Hamas firing rockets, which are still doing to this day, though the New York Times doesn't seem to report that. So there,
Can I ask, just looking at the existence of nation states, um,
go.
you know, this this idea became practical around developing economies in Europe, and then after the nations became states, they developed militaries. So this has become our normal. I think our normal is abnormal in the context of our common humanity. But the economies developed and European countries became quite wealthy, and because they needed militaries, they became quite powerful. Right around the time when there was a real rise in an anti-Semitism, going back to the 15th century. But also at that time, there emerged the transatlantic slave trade, and that contributed to the wealth of the West. And in this moment, right now in the 21st century, we are living in the West's advantage from the transatlantic slave trade and the dispossession of indigenous peoples around the world, whether you're talking Australia or you're talking the Americas or multiple islands. And in order to enforce the dispossession of these peoples, there had to be the economy for it, which, free labor. I mean, the biggest line item on anybody's business is labor. So if you get free labor, it sure gives you an advantage. And so I'm looking systemically that we live in a world that benefits right now from the transatlantic slave trade and the dispossession of indigenous peoples, and therefore our model for existence. I like what John Lennon said. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. And of course, when I think religion, I think that it can have a benefit as long as it doesn't become national like states do, you know. So that's my understanding of how nation states are at the core of the issue that we're looking at, not only in the problem with Israel and Palestine, but in Congo and in Haiti and other places where people are suffering and dying this very moment. I think that the nation state is an issue that needs to be, we need to take a look at.
David, I'm not going. Or you froze. Good, David. I'm not going to comment on that, and I like some of the things you're saying, but there's also a reality for the Jewish community. We can go back 325 Council of Nicaea,
Yeah.
325. There's a 1021. There's a violent earthquake, and the Jews are blamed for causing the earthquake.
Yeah.
During the Crusades, to go to Jerusalem, they stop whenever they come to a Jewish village, Jewish community. They basically destroy it and kill the people. That the lies about the Jewish people, 1243, of the host desecration. I was in Belgium, and I was taking a group of my students from Loyola, good Catholic students, and taking them around. And then the tour guide pulls me aside, says, "I need to show you something." We go to a large church, beautiful church, with stained glass windows, beautifully made, which depict Jews coming in, stealing the host, the communion wafers. And that's where that begins, all that stuff. All this stuff. The rumors recently during the pandemic, the Jews created the pandemic so they could make money creating now the vaccines. For the Jewish community, the fear of all of our history, part of the dream, maybe a nightmare, but part of the dream of Israel, it would be a place of safety for Jews. When you look at the history of Jerusalem or whatever, or England or France or all these countries, they've all expelled the Jews at one time, brought them back, expelled them again, often killing
Yeah.
them on the process. So I hear what you're saying, but the question for many of the Jewish community is, where can we go that is safe?
So the
And
the events that you mentioned, Nicaea and things like that, I'm sure you see how those are problems created by the West, by Westernism, by Western Christianity, which is why I, say that there's an inherent anti-Judaism embedded within Western Christianity, and perhaps more broadly than just the West. But as an issue, it's something that just doesn't seem to go away, and that's why I'm just saying that those things need to be dealt with at the core more radically than than can be solved with nation states, because nation states are part of the problem of exclusion, of genocide, of enslavement of African Americans. It's Westernism that's been at the core of this, and because of that, it's how are we going to solve our human interaction problems without looking at the core of the problem?
well, first of all, I don't think in terms of the Jewish communities. Remember, Israel is more from the Arab communities than they are from the Western communities, population wise. In addition, the Arab communities have also embraced some of these things, and
Yeah,
not just from the Western.
yeah.
So I don't want to just say it's that. I
No,
do want
and I totally support that, and yet the root of it, I mean, as we have talked before, Arthur, those trains that were packed with Jews, they weren't just in Germany; they were coming from other places in Europe, and so
yeah.
families were watching Jews go by and not do anything about it. And so, how can we solve a problem if we don't really look at the essence of its perpetration and the values that leave the door open for anti-Judaism?
I again, what I'm advocating for is that we do not give up on the Jews of Israel and the Palestinians within Israel and outside of Israel coming together. And that honestly, one of my goals is to increase the voice of the Palestinian Israelis to be the moderators. As it stands now, there is I would love for everyone not to have weapons. I would love not to be armies. I would love everyone to live in peace. Our tribe, our biblical tribe, through the Middle Ages, through the current times, where people blame us for, as I mentioned before, the pandemic, or a congressperson says that Israel has laser guns that are doing this and that. I can't rely on that.
Are you thinking of Marjorie Taylor Greene?
I would be thinking of her.
Yeah, Jews, space lasers or something like that. Yeah, well,
Yes. I
you
mean,
know, uh, yeah.
there's an old joke about the two guys on a New York subway, two Jews, and one's reading the paper, the anti-Semitic paper, and he goes, "Why are you reading that anti-Semitic stuff?" He goes, "Because in this paper, we're big, we're strong, and we're powerful." And it makes me feel it's when I was traveling in Europe this last time, it was a wonderful vacation, but I gave you some of the darkness that I felt and still feel. And I wear a yarmulke in Santa Barbara all the time. But there, when I was teaching in Germany, 2017, I think, the police chief said, "Please don't wear your yarmulke alone in the streets. You could be attacked, and we can't control that. In the hotels, in a restaurant, no problem." And I followed that same advice because people had told me to be careful. And one of the last Holocaust memorials I visited, I think was in Prague. And what it was is along the beachfront, or it's the riverfront of the Danube, there were bronze shoes from a long time ago that were then made into bronze along the area. And the guy told me this is where the Jews were brought down. They were asked to take off their shoes, and then they were shot in the head and pushed into the Danube. Those fears of the Holocaust, but also the Middle Ages. And currently, when so many of our allies have said about the women's treatment, that's fake news, or we don't see evidence of it. I mean, they've never done that with any other group.
Hmm.
I don't think there can be a sense of security without.
Okay, what if there were? Let me just propose. All right,
Yeah,
so as a black man with 4 sons and a daughter who are African Americans, we don't have any way of disguising or disrobing, that conceals our identity.
right.
And back in the 60s and 70s, especially on college campuses, but in a lot of spaces, Black people would greet each other by saying, what time is it? And the answer would be, it's nation time. But for the most part, nobody was thinking of a nation state, where, we required land, we required territory. We were talking about our solidarity as a people in the diaspora, Pan Africa coming together. But the option of actually creating a state was not really part of any of our conversations. So our solution is more about us accepting ourselves and our identity. And, we live in a nation state that remains very hostile so many times to our presence, to the point of, physical danger. The violence of Flint, Michigan, enacted by a Republican governor poisoning the water supply. We live with efforts at ethnic cleansing in our own nation state. And so that's why it's really hard for me to approve or to bless the existence of nation states, because I think that we need to accept our nationhood, our identity, whoever we are.
David, I love that. And the tribe of Israel, we had 12 at one time and so forth. We had the Holocaust, we had all the medieval, and it hasn't changed. And groups that we trusted. For instance, in this 1967 war, there was a UN peacekeeper group between Egypt and Israel. We trusted that they would protect. And then
Protect who?
to stop the war, stop any between Egypt and Israel, 67.
So again, we're talking about nation states.
I understand that. I don't know. Look at democracies as an example. Winston Churchill said is the worst form of government except for all the others. And the nation states, when they can work together, and maybe the hope was that, and maybe Hamas attacked because of that, that maybe Saudi Arabia and maybe Israel, maybe others could try maybe work together. And part of my goal at that point was to say, how do we also make sure that the Palestinians are part of that as well? And so I'm aware of those things, but I don't know right now of a system where my people would not be at risk, because when Egypt's told the UN to leave, they left and therefore opened it up for them to attack.
Do you see that in any way, is it conceivable that the creation of the state of Israel was an act of anti-Semitism?
I don't think so. I again, when I look at the initial map that the UN approved, it was not very protective of the Jewish community at all in Israel. And then you had 5 armies attack. Not good odds, because Israel did not have a standing army at that point. Israel did have the advantage, though, of being in interior, so they could move troops faster to the various borders when there were problems. So there was, but most people did not give them a fighting chance to survive. And So I like the beauty, and I like saying that I wish we could all live in peace, and that's what I've been working for, and all these things. And we create a peace garden on campus that has all different perspectives from Gandhi, be the change you want to be, Dalai Lama, everything else. My religion is kindness. All these things. Martin Luther King, Elie Wiesel, Rumi. Besides ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field where I will meet you. These things I believe in, but I also want to be able to sleep safely at night and not worry about being attacked and being killed. And
Hey, you're preaching to the choir.
I
You,
know
and
you're a good
uh,
choir, and you sing
yeah,
on tune.
so the reason I suggest, you mentioned the United Nations, which in fact is not the United Nations, it's the United Nations states. If we're if we're honest about it, it's not nations, it's states. And the reason I suggest that it could be the consequence of anti-Semitism is that this this anti-Semitism that is in the West, I'm talking about the most quote unquote innocent countries like New Zealand and Canada or whatever, who are not known for their militaries, but they have militaries that when you look at a problem and the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. So if you're using nation states to solve a problem of nation states, you're not going to unearth any problems. It has to come from our deep humanity.
We agree on that. I'm just saying to you, you know what I've done. For years, we brought Jews and Muslims together on campuses around the country. For years, we've done this to hear each other's stories, all the things I believe in. And yet, when posters of the hostages have been put up, remember that these are hostages taken and how they're being treated. And then they are ripped down because we don't want to talk about them. We don't want to acknowledge the humanity of these people, often young children, often older people, and how they were brutalized and are brutalized today. There's a deep fear that I think we have. I have.
I recognize that. I mean, I've had conversations with you before, and I have seen the fear, honestly, in your eyes, uh,
Yeah.
as we've talked.
So, but David, I want to acknowledge you as well. You talked about when you came to Santa Barbara, you're being followed by the police, and and clearly I can take off my yarmulke and maybe I'll pass as somebody else, but I don't do that because that's not who I want to be. But you don't have that particular choice. And I know on our campus at Loyola, I love being there. I've been honored to be there for 43 years. But in my classrooms, I generally have one African American student. And I've often taken him
Yeah,
aside and said, "How's it feel?" And he says, "It's terrible
yeah.
because I feel alone. I feel like I have to speak for my people." You and I have, in some ways, similar stories. They're not the same, of course, and all those things. Um,
We do. We have similar stories, ancestries, and experiences.
yeah,
One of the big differences is that I'm not looking for a solution in a nation state. I'm looking for our solution in our common humanity.
but David, my experience, my people's experience is that at some point they will be turned on by that nation state. And
That's
unless
why that's not a solution. That's why a nation state is not a solution.
no, 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 but there's no place that they can really go. Hitler wanted to make that point. He created a group, basically, he made sure it happened. There was a ship. They put on a lot of Jews and said, "See if other nations will accept you and take care of you." America said no. Canada said no. Yeah,
Yeah.
Cuba said no. And so our history has been if we're not there for ourselves, maybe others will not be there at all for us. And so so when you are dealing with extremists, that's why I say Palestinians, I'm pro Palestinian, but not the extremists. I'm also pro Israel, but also not the extremists. I'm not happy that we have Israeli extremists that are able to do things that that I believe strongly. No, they have to be stopped. So if the extremists still have power and have guns and so forth, I can be the nicest person. And you do know that some of the people that were burnt alive on October 7th, burnt alive, were the ones who were in the peace camp, were picking up people from Gaza, taking them to the hospitals, bringing them over to their homes. And so I can't afford for my people who are pretty small. I mean, Israel's size of New Jersey, small. And I can't afford for the one Jewish majority state compared to all the Islamic majority states, all the Christian majority states. And yes, you can say, well, then we should have no states at all. But I'm in the reality that that might work in 100 years, 50 years, whatever it is.
But
right
why
now,
can't we make it work now?
because I don't know how to make that work when you have people who, in our experience, my experience, are willing to turn on a dime.
You mentioned extremists a moment ago, and
Yeah,
I thought of the words of Martin Luther King, who said, "Call me an extremist because I'm an extremist for love." And
yeah,
if we lived as extremists for love, then my people would be your people. Your people would be
I
my
agree.
people. But the things that separate us are religion and nation statehood. And if somehow we could address the real problems of a separation and isolation, then we wouldn't need religious states, would we? We wouldn't need religious ethno states. We would need one another. You would
David,
need me and I would need you, and
David,
we would not need a backup plan. You
right.
know,
But
like
that,
if you get in trouble, you have another state to move to. And if I get in trouble, I need another state to move to. What if we just live together in love right here, right now?
David, people are screaming from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. You want to tell me what that means? What it means to me? Genocide. When Hamas did what it did, it was not just a one off. What they did was to create fear, to build on that fear. For those of my people who went through the Holocaust, have the memories, they're not saying it's 1933 yet. They're saying it's 1930. And so if you want me to trust institutions like the UN, we have a
I
chance.
don't. That's my whole point.
But anybody, but David, who will come and the allies we thought that would be there for us, that would say October 7th, that was atrocities. We have to say, no, that is wrong. They've been silent by and large, silent. And so if you want to tell me that there aren't people out there who are willing to die to kill me and are willing to do those things, I don't know how we're going to do that. But I think Israel has to, in that middle, especially Middle East, Israel has to be strong. I'm not advocating what they're doing I'm not supporting everything they're doing. That's not where I'm going. But if Israel's not seen as strong, it will be destroyed and there will be massacres. A friend of mine reported.
And see that's I think that's where where this is where I'm saying that we're not getting to the root of things,
Yeah,
because you're thinking Israel needs to be strong. I'm thinking humanity needs to be strong.
I think that those are nice words, David. In the reality of Middle East, especially there, I don't think it works. And I think that
I'm agreeing with you. That's my whole point.
no,
It doesn't work.
if
The
we,
systems don't work.
David, our experience has been through Middle Ages, and you've researched this area all the way through to now, when they wanted to kill the Jews or throw them out of Jerusalem or throw them out of Munich or have them in 1492 thrown out of Spain, I think 1290 from England. We have a long, long history of human beings not acting very humane, a long history of human beings lacking compassion, understanding, and love. And so I don't think what you're proposing is realistic. And we have to live in a real world that has been hostile. And that real world kills. Our people have been burnt alive in the Middle Ages all the time. They were forced to convert or die, many places like Spain, other places. And history has not been kind for a lot of reasons. And some may be nation states, some may be religious intolerance, all of those things. I don't have the luxury. My people don't have the luxury.
Are you suggesting that my people do have the luxury?
No, they don't either. But that's why when Black Lives Matter, I was very supportive and was very active in that.
Were
You know
you
that.
were you were supportive? Were you supportive of the idea of African Americans having their own nation state?
I don't think I'd have a major discussion, a major problem with having that. But
But I
again,
don't have I don't want that. I'm not looking for that.
I fine.
I'm
But
looking for the place where I am on this planet to be redeemed in some way for human. I don't think that white folks can be saved without recognizing what they have done institutionally to Black people and to indigenous people. I think that we all need salvation.
are Jews in your definition of indigenous people in
No,
Israel?
no, and in fact,
Mhm.
the idea of indigeneity is relatively and historically recent, and so I would say no,
Really?
because
Hmm.
I mean when you
I,
when
the Bible, one of the oldest tribes, we have proof of that,
right.
correct? And that they wanted to always return to Jerusalem. Passover Seder says that all the time, that we don't get that type of comment from you that we also have indigeneity in Israel?
Right, because I mean, even the Bible doesn't mention indigeneity. It doesn't describe it in any way because it is
No,
a term.
and God gave us that land because we were there, and we have proof of our kings. We have proof of being there pretty much all the time, though we were kicked out of Jerusalem, brought back, kicked out, brought back, massacred, brought back. And taking an old language and bringing it back to life. What other groups have done that?
That's I think we're sharing the same perspective here. Nobody.
Right? We're the first ones who have done that. That's why Hebrew was a dead language. We brought it back. So I want to
Oh,
live. So Dave,
I'm all in favor of people recovering their languages if it's if it's doable. But as a legal identifier, indigeneity is much more recent, and it has to do with colonization. And it
and by the way, isn't that interesting that maybe colonization and this whole thing of being colonized versus the colonizers and Eastern Europe and everything else, even though Israel, of course, has more from that region than they do from Europe,
yeah.
and that it was the UN that created that, not all the colonized groups and so forth. And so to use that, and I would say simply as a well, we created it right now, so that's our definition of it right now. Well, that's very convenient, as opposed to saying, wait a second,
But
not
it's
everything.
indigenous people who created that term for themselves. It's colonized people around the world who've created that term just in the past half century for themselves.
Maybe, but we have a homeland, size of New Jersey, that we've always wanted to go back to. That's always been part of our tradition. And but I want to say, and very clearly, that does not mean that we have exclusive control of that area. We have neighbors that we need to see and to work with. But there has to be trust, and a great deal of trust, because there's been a history here of not trust. And as I
So can that be done? Can that be accomplished in the framework of nation states?
I think realistically, it's today's realities. I can't go into a different world. I have to be in this world. And I don't think it can be done without using nation states right now. And that's why I'm for a two-state solution. I've always
Okay.
been for a state solution.
And I mean, we can have different perspectives on that. I just don't think nation states have holistic solutions. I don't, as a person whose family has been in a nation state here in the
Yeah.
U.S. For 4 centuries plus, I don't see solutions within nation states. I think that a lot of our solutions are more organic than that, in our humanity, and they transcend borders, and they transcend our religions, our faith systems. I think that
So,
I think that there's a beauty that
Dave,
you and I share that go
yes,
beyond our religious identities or ethnic identities.
first of all, I agree with all that. But while we're doing that, while we're creating this ideal world, which I could be part of, please make sure that my people can sleep safely at night and not be worried that they'll be mowed down and destroyed intentionally in a very vicious way to create terror and fear. So help me do that.
I, th- I,
No, we lost each
no, I think that that's possible, but I just don't think it's possible within the framework of nation states. I just
well then
think I think it
like,
I think that will compound the problems because our nation states tend to be, for the most part, in the West, tend to be capitalistic, and capitalism requires victims. I mean, you can't have capitalism without excluding people, without causing people to suffer, without having people at the bottom. You can't have capitalism without having those things.
David, I don't want to. Fine. Create for me a system that I can support that will also protect my people that have a history that has not stopped, really, from when 325, 325 until now. My people have been subjected to so many atrocities, burnt alive, Middle Ages, all the time. Chose to convert or we kill you.
Yeah.
All of those things. Taking away my kids, my children to become a different religious tradition because that was the majority. And then
And
the
who and Arthur, who did this to your people? Who were the oppressors?
there were a lot of religious individuals who were involved in that.
And from what part of the
And,
world?
well, they were both Middle East and because Jerusalem, Middle East a lot, as well
So
as Europe. Yes.
as well as Europe. You wouldn't put Europe in front of that line?
I put Europe in front, sure.
Yeah.
I don't have to, but
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 nobody from Indonesia, nobody from Ghana, what is called Ghana now, nobody from Southern Africa, nobody from Central South America. You know, these things were engineered by a specific worldview and ideology.
but what about South Africa and they're taking and their position?
No,
So
I'm
I
talking about historically.
I
Historically,
yes.
anti-Semitism springs from a Christian West way of being.
However, explain to me where 624 Islam is created, 700 basically, Quran codified and so forth. And there's a recording of Muhammad watching 600 Jews being beheaded. So I think there's more going on than just that.
Okay, so we're getting in the weeds here because Islam arose in resistance to Christian empire, a
Yes.
violent Christian empire.
Yes.
Okay, so still we're talking about a problem that eventuates in a patriarchal, capitalistic, nation state way of being in the
Oh
world.
no.
Did I disappear?
David, you're still there?
I'm here.
Yeah. I know. David, how about, because I know the time is going, how about we go as follows? One is that you and I have a history of respecting each other and learning from each other. And that's the model that we need. But I also know how the African American community has not been treated fairly, obviously. There are so many issues that are still so present. We've talked about this. But I also need for you to also, and you have, talked about how the Jewish community is feeling very unsafe right now in violent ways on campuses, that had the African Americans been treated as the Jews have been treated on campuses, there'd be a very different response, we believe.
Wait a minute, Arthur, African Americans are treated that way and have always been treated that way on university campuses. That's why I went to Missouri 5 years ago to stand with African American students.
Oh, I like that. I didn't know that. Okay. So we both know what that's like.
That's why we have historically Black colleges and universities basically they're kind of like the Brandeis of, Black people.
I know. And by the way, initially, there were only 2 Ivy League schools initially that would accept Jews.
Yeah. And guess how many of them accepted Blacks?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, we can't, I don't think having a persecution Olympics is productive, is going to, bring us. But the thing is that we do have to acknowledge that people of the world have been marginalized by white Christian Westerners in a way that dominates the world. And until there is a recognition of this, that it is anti-Black, that it is anti-Semitic, and especially anti-Indigenous, until there is a recognition of this, we're not going to reach good solutions.
So I support what you just said. No problems. But in the meantime, until there are solutions, please help me, and I want to help you protect our people. And what happened October 7th, because I saw videos taken by Hamas of what they did, killing the parents in front of their children.
It is unjust. I mean, killing is unjust, but it is unjust. It is immoral. But there has been an October 7th every single day since then happening to the people in Gaza.
Well, I don't think they were being targeted as families were being targeted to be wiped out and killed. There's a new term that's going to be adopted, maybe, trying to kill a whole family. That the women and how they were treated, the rape, the cutting off of breasts, all those types of things, those were atrocities. And we can argue about Israel's attacking and were they bombing too much and all those things. And I may agree with you on a lot of that. But it's a different, oh no. David, thank you for this discussion. I always enjoy being with you and learning with you. And I'm reminded of Rumi's quote that I often use, but so appropriate. Beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there's a place that I will meet you. David, may we always meet in that place.
Yes. Well, I wanted to just ask, this is 1 year of Carrie and I doing this podcast. We started in May of 2023. Wow. And, of all of the people that we've had, and as you know, because I know you've listened to several of our programs, we've had, some pretty amazing people, including you. But you are the very first person to have actually asked to be on our show. And I'm just curious as to what motivated you to invite yourself, if you will. I mean, I was glad to have you on, of course.
Yeah, you should have invited me a long time ago, but we'll ignore that one. I think the reason, Dave, is because I know you, I like you, I trust you. I know we may disagree, but you have a good soul and you speak from the heart. And I want to be supportive of this endeavor. And I'm really happy to know this is the anniversary, and may there be many, many more anniversaries.
Thank you so much, Arthur. And thank you for being a friend. And everybody, you have met Arthur Gross-Schaefer. Thank you for joining us on God is Not an Asshole.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell and we want to know about it. Please contact us on Twitter at God is not an asshole or text 805-703-8393 because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole. The show's music is composed by Christian Moore, show art created by Evan Kerr, and the episodes are produced by Josh Perez.